Yeah, so today we'll be discussing architects and draftspersons visa pathways to Australia. Disclaimer, this webinar is just for general information. Please do not treat this as advice because the migration law changes all the time and everyone would have different scenario circumstances. So today, what we'll be discussing are occupation overview of those roles, the architects and draftspersons, their salary, where they are in the occupation list, skills assessment or registration requirements, study pathways. This is like if you want to become an architect or a draftsperson, what do you need to study? And then we go through the visa options. These are the different ones from PR to student visa. And then next steps.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to explain a little bit about what architects and landscape architects and architectural draftsperson do in not only in Australia, but in general. I actually have a personal point of view in this because my husband is an architect and we migrated to Australia quite a few years ago. So we did the whole thing ourselves. So I have this personal point of view into the profession. So architects, they do the planning and design of built structures, anything from small buildings to high rise and complex structures. The main task is to create concepts, plans, specification. They will do all the detailed drawings. They will liaise with both the clients, getting the brief, all consulting professionals such as structural engineers. They will liaise with Conceal to get plans approved and everything else. They will prepare documentation for contract. They will make the whole documentation from tender. They will inspect the construction works when the building is going. They start the building and everything else. There's lots of tasks related to architects. These are just a few of them. The minimum requirement here in Australia is a bachelor degree or higher. So you can have a bachelor or a master degree. In general here, it is required a master in architecture. That's how the system works in here. You will do a 3-year bachelor followed by a master in architecture. And you need to be registered to call yourself an architect. You can work not being registered if you're under supervision of an architect, but you need registration to call yourself an architect. And that's done in the local boards, but you need a national accreditation before you're allowed to register in the local boards, the state boards. Next slide. Landscape architects. The landscape architects, they will do the external areas. They're the ones who are planning all parks and the external areas of schools and larger projects, or even small projects, a small house. That kind of work is a little less specialized, but you still require a bachelor degree, and it is still a professional, considered a professional. It does not require registration, so it's a little bit easier. And yeah, I think that's mainly the role of the landscape architect. They deal with the outside of the building, the external areas and everything else. And we also have the architectural draftsperson. The draftsperson, they will do more the technical side of it. They will do the construction drawings. They will prepare all the documentation. They will liaise with builders and contractors. But the work is more restricted to doing the operational part of the work, doing all the drawings and the details. The qualification required, it's an associate degree or an advanced diploma or diploma, which is normally a 2-year course. It's not a higher, it's not a bachelor level. There are other related occupations in the code. Some are related to architecture, but others are more related to surveying and building surveyors or land surveyors. There are other options if you do something more associated with building inspections, or you do the part of construction estimator, where you're doing the contract, dealing with the contract and estimating cost of constructions. There are also plumbing and surveyor inspectors and all other technicians. But we're going to focus this webinar on the architectural draftsperson and the architects. The salaries, you can find a little bit of variation. The official job outlook gives you the higher values. Architects 2,546 a week. But if you look on Seek, which is where we find most job offers and things like that, it is a bit lower than that. In practical terms, the difference between an architectural draftsperson and an architect that is not registered is not that great in practical terms when you're actually looking for jobs in the reality in here. The difference increases when you go to higher level positions, and when you're talking about registered architects, when you get a little bit more responsibility in managerial positions. But on entry to medium level positions, there's not much of a difference between architectural draftspersons and architects. Landscape architect is a little bit more restricted because it's a job field which is slightly different, but the main earnings are similar to that. Okay, so we're talking about occupation lists now. There are actually three occupation lists in our immigration system. The first one is the medium and long-term skill list, which is the occupations where we have high demand in Australia. These are the occupations which give you the most opportunities in terms of visas and things like that, because these are the occupations we're looking for in Australia. There's high demand, everyone needs it, and gives you the most options. Architects and landscape architects are both in the medium and long-term list. Architectural draftsperson is in the short-term skill list, which means you can still have opportunities to migrate. There are less options. Many of them will require either a work sponsor or a state sponsoring you, and it will vary according to the state. Some states actually require architectural draftspersons, and you might get a sponsorship from a state. Others, it won't have that chance. Skill assessment and registration. So the skill assessment for architects it's a complicated process. It used to be in two stages. They combine it, the two stages. So now it's just one stage. You make one application. And the first step is that we're going to check your qualification. You need at least 5 years of tertiary education. They say they actually accept 4 years if that leads to a registration in your country. But the reality is they're going to check the hours according to the hours that they think are necessary for you to match the curriculum, the syllabus and the curriculum. So while they say they can accept, the chance of actually having a 4-year tertiary education working for them as if it was a 5-year is not that great, unless you have additional courses like you have a master or something else. There is the possibility, but the reality is that that's a very hard try. It's not that it's impossible, but it's a hard chance to get it. You also need 6 months work experience. This needs to be post-qualification. Any work placement that you do as part of your course, it's not counted. So you need to get your qualification, and after that, you need 6 months worth of experience. And you need a minimum English proficiency test. They say IELTS, but I think they do accept PTE. After that, if they assess your qualification as equivalent to the Australian qualification, then you have a competence-based assessment, which includes a portfolio, which about 3 projects, where you need to show you are actually capable of doing the work of an architect. and also an interview. The whole process is about $3,000, and it's not registration yet. That's just the skill assessment. That's the initial point. If you want to be registered, you need to have your qualifications assessed. After that, for registration, you still need to do more things. You need to do a logbook of work, 3,000 hours, explaining all your projects and everything else. This logbook ideally should be done in Australia.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add something about that 5-year tertiary education, because most of our viewers are from the Philippines. Architecture in the Philippines, bachelor's degree is 5 years, but it's not comparable to the 5 years here, because our 5 years in the Philippines, there's English, there's works of Rizal, there's history, things that we don't really need, because the 5 years in Australia, if they require that, it's really geared towards architecture. So if you just look at the years, oh, I have that, then I should be able to get it. Architecture skills assessment is very difficult. It's very difficult. The AACA, that's hard. And as what Iris said, registration is again a different application.
Exactly. And they compare the syllabus. And so you need to match exactly the same syllabus, the same course, the same subjects you had in here. That's what they need. You need to match exactly. And it is very hard, not only for Philippines, but for many countries. They are very strict. They do give you a little bit of feedback if you fail, but it's not that much. And yeah, it's a very hard assessment process. And the registration is also very complex, because you need the 3,000 hours logbook, and you also need to do an exam. The registration, even if you are graduate in here, you still need to do that, the same process. You still need to do the 3,000 hours, and you still need to do the exam, which is not that easy. They have it twice a year. But there are lots and lots of architects here who are graduated here. They are not registered because they don't want to go through the process of being supervised and doing the logbook and everything else. So yeah, it's a complicated process. There is a pathway where you can actually apply to register, and it also works as a skill assessment if you are a very experienced architect. But that's if you have 7-year postgraduate experience and at least 1 year in here, 3 years in what they call executive capacity. That means you're at decision capacity, working with complex projects. So you mean high-rise buildings or large buildings. And you need to be living in Australia for at least a year. So there is a residence thing as well. So it's not an easy process either. So yeah, ACAA, they are not a very easy body to deal with. And that's the reality of it.
I guess we move on to the easier one.
Yeah. Our landscape architect is just much easier. You need a highly relevant bachelor degree and 1 year work experience. The assessment is done through VetAssess. They are easier to deal. It's far more direct. They just want a highly relevant bachelor degree, which will be probably in landscape architecture or a related course. Some countries, like I know in Brazil, for example, architecture and landscape architecture sometimes are combined in one course, and that'll be a highly relevant as well because it deals with the same subject. It's also cheaper. So for an architectural draftsperson, that's even easier because you have many ways of getting that qualification. You can have a highly relevant diploma or equivalent. So it could be a bachelor degree or it could be a lower degree like a diploma, plus 1 year of experience, and that will give you the qualification. You can have even an unrelated diploma, but if you have a certificate, which is a qualification that's normally a 6-month qualification, 6 months to a year qualification in a relevant field, like architectural drafting or drafting, plus 1 year of experience, you will also qualify as an architectural draftsperson. You could also have a completely unrelated diploma with no major related and 2 years of experience. You will also qualify. The experience, it's important to say, it's normally full-time experience. It needs to be post-qualification. It can't be before. Or you can have no formal qualification, but lots of experience, at least 4 years of experience. And one of these need to be recent within the last 5 years. And that's another way of qualifying as an architectural draftsperson for VETASES. Applications for VETASES are also a little bit cheaper. If you're overseas, it's a little under $1,000. And there's no registration requirements in Australia for architectural draftspersons.
I just wanted to explain about what diploma means. Because in the Philippines, we call it a diploma when we finish a bachelor's degree. That's different. Like in Australia, a bachelor's degree is higher than a diploma. So that, because even if you finish a bachelor's degree in the Philippines, if it's not equivalent to the Australian standard, then it goes down to an associate degree or a diploma. So you might still satisfy it, even if your bachelor's degree is not a bachelor's equivalent in Australia. But I'm just confirming the terminologies here that, you know, we always say that I have a diploma, but really what we meant is a bachelor's degree.
So to study architecture in Australia, so normally you do a Master of Architecture. So for example, if you have a diploma in Philippines or a bachelor degree in here, you can also then take a Master of Architecture, and then you will qualify as an architect. Each university will have their own rules on which courses will grant you access to a Master's of Architecture. Sometimes a little bit of experience can replace the fact that it's not so related to it, but you need to see with the university which are the requirements to get into a Master's of Architecture. If you don't have any pre-qualification and any tertiary qualification, you have to do a bachelor before. And normally here you get a bachelor in architectural design or build structures. Each course also has their own denomination, but it's a similar course. Landscape architects, it's a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture, regular 3-year course, and that's straightforward. To be an architectural draftsperson, that's what in the Australian qualifications framework, it's called a diploma, which is normally a 2-year, 1.5 to 2 years course. It's more technical. It will give you all the technical base to be able to do all the documentations for architecture. It also gives you a significant base of understanding the legislation and the requirements, the building requirements in here, which are quite different. And it's important if you're working in here, is to understand all the regulations and not only council, but national standards of building and things like that. And it's either a diploma of building design or advanced diploma of building design. It's normally 2 years. You can find them in universities or some TAFE courses as well.
Just to give you an idea about the pricing, because people are thinking, okay, if I study there, how much is that? A bachelor's degree or master's degree can range between 35 to 40K Australian dollars per year. A diploma, advanced diploma, depending on the education provider, it can be between $15,000 to $20,000 Australian dollars a year. So visa options, this is, you know, what it is for. This presentation is all about pathways. Architects and landscape architects are in the medium to long-term strategic skills list. As what Iris mentioned, it means that if you are in this list, you have more options, okay? So the first thing that we're talking about is permanent residency. This is when you say that I want to migrate to Australia, meaning living here permanently. And GSM is General Skilled Migration Stream. The key requirements are you should have at least 65 migration points. Migration points is based on your age, work experience, English level, and other things. I have a separate video about that, it's entitled PR Visa Options in Australia, and it discusses the point system. Skills assessment, that has been discussed by Iris already because you have to pass that first. There's the English, health and character, and all the other requirements. So what are those options? There's the 189. So 189 visa. This is what we meant that, if you're in MLT SSL, you have more options. So basically, architects and landscape architects can have all of these options. But the draftspersons, architectural draftspersons, they are not eligible for 189 visa because they are enlisted under the short-term skilled occupation list, STSOL. So yeah, it says 190. So 189 is an skilled independent visa. What it means is that if you get that, you can live anywhere in Australia. Okay, but it's so hard to get that because your point should be very high and you're competing with other nominated occupations. Skill nominated subclass 190. This is a state-sponsored visa. So every state would have their own rules. For example, in Victoria, they want you to be already here and working in your nominated occupation. You should have STEM skills and you should be working in Victoria's critical sectors. It's a bit hard, there's a lot of requirements. But again, depends on which state you want to go to, or sometimes the other way around, which state would accept you. There's the skilled work regional provisional subclass 491. This is if you want to live and work in a designated regional area. So it's like provincial area. But this is just a provisional PR. This would be good for, the visa would be granted for 5 years. And after 3 years, if you stay in the designated regional area, you work in the same nominated occupation and you earn at least $54,000 a year, you can be eligible for the PR visa 191. Okay. There are also employer-sponsored visas. So when people always ask, oh, can I work there in Australia? You can, but you have to have an employer who would sponsor you. And that's the hard bit. It's not like going to a different country whereby you can just work because you have a work visa. In here, before you get the visa, you need to get a sponsor. Yeah, so I said, a sponsoring employer, that's number one. You can't just say, I want to work there. Well, you can't without the sponsor. It asks you, so there are different kinds of employer-sponsored visas. The very first thing that I'm discussing is the 186 visa. So it's a permanent residency visa, but it requires you to have 3 years of full-time work experience in your field. So as an architect, landscape architect, or a draftsperson, architectural draftsperson, you should have the skills assessment. You should have the required qualification. And, as I said, it's for architects, registration is required. So you should have that as well. English language, health and character, that's always there. And all the other requirements, you should be below 45. Unless exempt. All right. So that's the usual. When people want to migrate, but they're already 50, of course they cannot. But there are other programs that are called the DAMA, which they can accept people over 45. But again, you should have a sponsor or an employer. All right. So the other one that I've discussed was the direct entry. And there's another flavor of the 186. It's a transition stream. So it means that you came from a different visa, the temporary visa 482 or 457. It's now 482. It used to be 457. Almost the same, but you don't need the skills assessment. You have the same age requirement. Okay. Oh, by the way, that transition stream, you should be in the same employer. You can't be like working for one employer and then you move to another employer. You can, but you still have to do that 3 years because you can only get to the 186 transition stream visa if you have spent 3 years, at least 3 years with your current employer. Okay, this is the temporary one, 2 to 4 years of work visa, depending on which list you are part of. If you're a medium to long term, which is architect and landscape architect, then you can have a visa of up to 4 years. Okay, and then on the 3rd year, you can be eligible for the ENS 186 if your employer still wants to sponsor you on that visa. Again, you should have a sponsor. The minimum requirement is just 2 years of full-time work experience in the last 5 years. So this one should have recency. Of course, you have to have the required qualification, may require registration if it is required for the role. English language requirement, genuine temporary entrant. I'm sure you've heard about this many times for student visa applications. It's just saying that if you're part of the short-term skilled occupation list, you have to justify that you do not have any intentions to stay in Australia permanently. Okay, you can prove that saying that you still have family abroad, or you really plan to work or migrate somewhere else, but not in Australia. Health and character and other visa requirements. What else? Student visa, this is what I've mentioned. So if you heard that, so difficult anyway, if it doesn't match the curriculum of Australia, all these units that you've studied in your home country is not relevant, then you might say that, oh, I'll just study in Australia. At least, I learned the Australian way and I learned the units that's really required. You will be required for the genuine temporary entrant. Again, you can never say that, oh, I'm studying so that I can be permanent. They will refuse your student visa application because you have to prove that you're staying here temporarily, because that's what the visa is for, just studying here. English language, financial capacity, this all would depend on the education provider. So if it's a master's degree, usually they have that English requirement from the university themselves. But for the visa, depending on the risk assessment level of the education provider, if they are assessment level 2 or 1, financial capacity and English language, mean English test result would not be required when lodging the student visa application. It means that, yes, it's not required when you lodge it, but the case officer might still ask for it. Because in the student visa application form, they ask you about your financial capacity. Like, do you have the capacity to study here and live here in Australia during the time that you're studying? They would usually look at the first year, your first year tuition fee, your first year of living cost, which is about $21,000 to $22,000. And then, of course, what's that? Travel expenses. They look at that. So overall, you should have that. And you should say that you have that money, whether it's coming from yourself, your bank account, your partner, your spouse, or your family. Okay. On a student visa, you are allowed to work part-time, 20 hours a week. But right now, because of the pandemic and Australia needs people, all international students can work unlimited hours, but we just don't know until when they would stop that. But originally, without the pandemic, it's only 20 hours a week, but you get unlimited hours if the one studying is studying master's by research or PhD. If that person has a partner, and if that person was just studying master's by coursework, then the wife or the husband can work full-time, unlimited work hours. Also, as the primary visa holder, during your official breaks, you can work unlimited hours. You may be eligible for a graduate visa. So if it's a master's degree, 2 years, bachelor's degree, 2-3 years, then you can move on to a graduate visa. Okay. All right. So the next steps that were, for you would be you do your own research, right? We've discussed the skills assessment. We've told you which are the skills assessing body. So AACA, VetAssess. Don't take our word for it. Google them and look at it. Visa options, we've told you which visa options that you may have. then you can always visit Department of Home Affairs website. Now, if it's still unclear for you, then we are here for you. If you want a discussion about your case, then you should book a consultation with us. So either myself or Iris or both of us can be there. We do charge for the consultations at $165 per session. Now, this amount gets back to you as a discount on our application assistance fee if you sign up with us. If you want a thorough discussion of your visa options in Australia, book in a consultation with our registered immigration agents at www.bridgeaus.com.au.